That's Life, a Dvar Torah for Parashat Metzora. I recently finished teaching the curriculum at school, gave my students summary papers, and mentally prepared myself for dead classes. Lesson that in the best case scenario, students come to clarify technical points about submitting the work, and in the worst case, just disappear. I was really surprised when a student told me there was no way she was going to let this happen. She will do the work at home, and my job is to find interesting and challenging topics in Tanakh for us to learn together, whether they're in curriculum or not. She said, so I did, and they come. Not everyone, not always, but we learn and we really enjoy it. What does this have to do with this week's parasha? Only that I started looking for different and challenging topics and found myself telling several students that had never heard of Tzara'at that part of the process of cleansing from it is taking 2 pure live birds, cedar wood, silk, and moss, slaughtering one of the birds into a pottery vessel near a spring, mixing the blood using the silk, the moss, and the cedar, dipping the living bird in the blood of the slaughtered bird, and releasing it over a field. At this point, the students were shocked by the trauma the live bird was going through, but they agreed to check some technical points. It was interesting, for example, to compare Ibn Ezra's interpretation, which focused very much on what was done and how, which bird, who provides, what plants, to Rabbi Yosef Bechor Shor's interpretation, who was more interested in why, a sign that the Metzora has descended from heights. They also tried to understand why there were so many stages in the Metzora's purity. Everything that happens to the bird, washing clothes, entering the camp but staying out of the tent, shaving, sacrifices, sprinkling, etc. But what interested them most, with a little help from me, is why the term chai is repeated so many times while describing the tzara'at and the purification process. To understand what exactly bothered us, it's worth knowing a few interesting points. In the opening description of Tzara'at, one of the conditions of impurity is that in addition to the afflicted flesh, there's live flesh as well. The day the living flesh becomes white, i.e. dies, the Tzara'at becomes pure. The word chai, live, is repeated in this passage 5 times, and adding the word michyat makes it 6. Then the word disappears from the verses, with one exception that we won't deal with, until the description of the purification process, where the Kohen takes 2 living birds, slaughters one on living water, takes the live bird, dips the live bird on the living water, and sends the live bird. That's a lot of liveliness. What increased our interest was the fact that apart from the live birds brought by the Metzora, there's only one other animal in Tanakh with so much emphasis on the fact that it's alive. Sa'ir HaMishtalech and Yom Kippur. The live goat stands alive when it's brought alive, and then leaned on alive. And then, like the bird, is sent to a place with no people to continue living its life. At least that's how it seems from the verses. The problem is that Chazal refused to allow the poor goat to live the rest of its life pleasantly, but tell us that the man who accompanied the goat to Mount Azazel also pushes him off the top of the cliff, and so the goat dies a natural death, because it's only natural that when plunging off a cliff, one dies. But at least the bird gets to live, right? Not necessarily. When asked why the Torah chooses to traumatize the living bird in my students, Chizkuni explains that the bird's ex-friends will see that it is strange and changed color, and they'll have it executed. Which leaves us with the question, after so much emphasis on the bird and goat being alive, why is it so important to ensure their untimely death? I will note that not all commentators agree that the bird needs to be killed. Rabbi Yosef Bechor Shor, for example, emphasizes that it's sent across the field and not to the desert or sea because this is where it can survive and we want it to live a long and happy life. But Chizkuni left a strong impression. The answer given by my students, which still requires some clarification, is that there's an emphasis on life to show that even when things don't look so good, when the Metzora is disconnected from life due to his actions, when he has to sit outside the camp and needs atonement, one can still return to life. As the Midrash says, God was asked the sinner, what is his punishment? And he told them to repent and it will be atoned for. But the commentators have also identified a danger in this approach. After all, if it's so simple to atone for what has been done, what will keep us from sinning over and over again? Sometimes the system also needs to be shaken. There is a need for a graphic description of what will happen to the bird and the goat further down the road, and I might add, what will happen to the sinner if he does not improve his needs. The Torah was asked, a sinner, what is his punishment? And she said to them, he will bring a sacrifice and atone. Do I understand Chazal's attitude? Those who represent the Torah? Absolutely. I'd have to be blind not to see it after so many years as an educator. What approach do I prefer? I'm with God. If you enjoyed this, please subscribe. I'm Dovi Holtz, one who loves Tanakh.